It is 3 in the morning, and you are not asleep. You are lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and the voice in your head will not stop. It is replaying a conversation you had 6 hours ago. Something you said that came out wrong. It is rehearsing tomorrow. It is telling you that you are behind, that you are not doing enough, that everyone else has figured out something you have not, and the strangest part is, you know it is not helpful. You know this. You have told yourself 100 times to stop, but the voice does not listen because the voice is not taking orders from you. It feels like you, it sounds like you, but here is the question that will change everything, and it is a question that a man sitting under a fig tree in northern India asked 2,500 years before neuroscience, before psychology, before anyone had a word for the default mode network or the inner critic or the negativity bias. He asked the simplest, most dangerous question in the history of the human mind. Not how do I stop thinking, but who is the one thinking? His name was Siddhartha Gautama. And the answer he arrived at that night would become the most radical psychological claim ever made. More radical than Freud. More radical than Darwin. More radical than anything modern science has produced. Because modern science is only now beginning to confirm what he said. He said, there is no one thinking. Not, your thoughts are not real. They are real. Not, you do not exist. You exist. But the you behind the thoughts, the fixed, solid, permanent self you have spent your entire life defending, decorating, and worrying about, that self is a construction, a pattern, a habit the mind runs so constantly that you mistake it for a thing. He called this teaching Anattā. Say it like Anattā, and it means simply non-self. This is not a video about emptying your mind. This is not a video about becoming nobody. This is not a philosophy of nihilism or nothingness or despair. This is about the most compassionate insight any human being has ever offered another, and why it might be the single most useful thing you hear this year. And here is the strange part. The first time the Buddha taught this, the very first time he said these words aloud, he said them to 5 men who had abandoned him in disgust just weeks before. 5 men who had watched him give up extreme fasting, watched him eat a bowl of rice, and decided he was a failure, a quitter. We will come back to why those 5 men were sitting in front of him again, and what happened when he finished speaking. But not yet. To understand what the Buddha actually said about the self, you need to go to a deer park on the outskirts of a city called Varanasi. The place was called Isipatana, the place where the sages fell. And the year, as best scholars can reconstruct, was somewhere around 528 BCE. 5 ascetics are sitting on the ground. They are thin. Their robes are rough. For 6 years, they had practiced extreme austerity alongside a man named Gautama, starving themselves, sleeping on thorns, holding their breath until they nearly passed out. And then Gautama quit. He ate food. He bathed. They walked away from him, certain he had lost his nerve, but now he is standing in front of them again. Something has changed. They can see it in his face, and despite themselves, despite the resentment, despite the betrayal, they sit down and listen. What happens next is preserved in a text called the Anattā Sutta. It is the second discourse the Buddha ever gave, recorded in the Samyutta Nikaya. And it is not a sermon. It is a deconstruction. The Buddha does not make grand claims. He asks questions. He says, look at your body, your form. Is it permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. And is what is impermanent satisfactory or unsatisfactory? Unsatisfactory, Lord. And is it fitting to regard what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to change as, this is mine, this I am, this is myself? No, Lord. Then he moves to feeling. The raw sensation of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral that arises in every moment of your experience. Is feeling permanent? No. Is feeling you? Then he moves to perception, the labeling function of the mind, the part that says red or loud or dangerous. Is perception permanent? No. Then mental formations, your intentions, your habits, your reactions, the patterns you run on autopilot. Permanent? No. And finally, consciousness itself. The knowing, the awareness, the thing you are most tempted to call me. Is consciousness permanent? No. Lord, 5 questions, 5 answers, all the same. And here is what most people miss about this teaching. The Buddha is not telling them the answer. He is making them see it. He is walking them through their own direct experience and asking, where is the self? Point to it. Find the part that does not change. Find the part that is truly, permanently yours. They cannot find it. Nobody can. The Pali word for these 5 categories is khanda. Say it like khanda, and it means heap or aggregate. That is all you are. According to the Buddha, 5 heaps, 5 processes stacked on top of each other, changing every second, and the mind looks at this churning pile and says, that is me. That is who I am. But it gets stranger. A few years later, the Buddha is standing on the bank of the Ganges River. A crowd has gathered, and he reaches down and scoops up a handful of foam from the surface of the water. He holds it up and says, this is form. Look at it. It has shape, it has weight, but squeeze it, and there is nothing inside. Then he points to a bubble on the water's surface. This is feeling. It appears, it shines for a moment, it pops. Gone, a mirage on the road. This is perception. It looks real from a distance. Walk toward it, nothing there. He picks up a piece of banana tree trunk and peels it. Layer after layer after layer. You keep peeling, looking for the heartwood, the solid core. There is no core. This is mental formations and consciousness. He points to a magic show, an illusion performed on the street. It looks real while you are watching. You are moved by it. You gasp. You laugh. But none of it was what it appeared to be. This teaching is called the Phena Sutta, the foam discourse, and it is preserved in the Samyutta Nikaya. And the Buddha's question at the end of it is devastating in its simplicity. What essence could there be? Not there is no essence. A statement you can argue with, but a question. A question you have to sit with. And then something unexpected happens. About 200 years later, and 1,000 miles to the northwest, in the courts of a Greek king, this teaching gets its most famous illustration. And it comes from a conversation that never should have happened. The king's name was Milinda. The Greek name was Menander I, and he ruled a stretch of what is now Pakistan and northern India. He was sharp, Greek-educated, trained in logic, and he invited a Buddhist monk named Nāgasena to his court to debate. Milinda asks, "What is your name?" "Monk." Nāgasena answers, "I am known as Nāgasena." But Nāgasena is only a designation, a label, a convenient expression. There is no permanent person to be found here. Milinda pushes back. He is a Greek king. He believes in identity. He says, if there is no Nāgasena, then who is standing in front of me? Who wears these robes? Who speaks these words? And Nāgasena, pay attention to this, does not argue. He points to the king's chariot. Is the axle the chariot? Your Majesty. No. Are the wheels the chariot? No. The frame? The yoke? The reins? No. 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 Then where is the chariot? If none of these parts is the chariot, does the chariot not exist? Milinda smiles. He sees it. The chariot exists, but not as a thing separate from its parts. It is a label applied to an assembly. Take it apart, and there is no chariot essence hiding in any single piece. Nāgasena says, so it is with me. So it is with you. So it is with every being you have ever met. The chariot still works. It still rolls. It still carries a king. Nothing was taken from it. Nāgasena did not destroy the chariot. He clarified what it is and what it is not. An assembly, a process, a pattern that holds together for a while. And this is the part that most people get wrong about non-self. They hear no self and they hear loss. They hear erasure. They hear nihilism. But Nāgasena is not saying the chariot does not exist. He is saying it does not exist the way you think it does. And neither do you. And to understand how radical this was, you have to understand what everyone else in India believed at the time. The dominant spiritual tradition, the one recorded in the Upanishads, the one every educated person in the Buddha's world had grown up with, taught the exact opposite. It taught Ātman, the eternal soul, a permanent, unchanging essence at the core of every being, like a jewel hidden inside layers of cloth. Your body changes, your thoughts change. Your circumstances change, but the Ātman endures. It was the one thing you could count on, the one thing that was truly, finally, irreducibly you. And the Buddha looked at this idea, the most comforting idea in his entire civilization, and said, I have looked for it. I have looked in form. I have looked in feeling. I have looked in perception, in mental formations, in consciousness. And it is not there. He was not adding a footnote to the tradition. He was pulling the floor out from under it. Every seeker in India was looking for the eternal self. The Buddha said there is no eternal self to find. And the path to freedom begins exactly at the moment you stop looking. That took courage, the kind of courage that does not announce itself, the kind that simply says what it sees, even when what it sees will make everyone uncomfortable. So here is the pattern. Every time the Buddha examines a part of what you call yourself, your body, your feelings, your perceptions, your mental habits, your consciousness, he finds the same thing. Not nothing, but not a self either. A process, a flow, something real and vivid and undeniable, but nothing you can grab and say, this is who I truly am. This will never change. If this is the first time you are hearing the actual teaching, not the bumper sticker version, not the Instagram quote, but the actual logic the Buddha used, and it is landing for you. Subscribe to this channel. This is what we do here. We take the Dharma apart. We look at what it actually says, and we make it useful. Not mystical. Not academic. Just clear. Now, stay with me. Because this is where the teaching turns. Most people encounter non-self as a standalone idea, a bullet point on a list of Buddhist concepts, but the Buddha never taught it that way. He taught it as one of 3 marks of existence, 3 things that are true of every experience you will ever have. The first mark is anicca. Say it like anicca, impermanence. Everything changes. Your body, your mood, your relationships, the economy, the weather. The person you were at 16 is not the person you are now, and the person you are now will not be the person you are at 80. This is not philosophy. This is direct observation. The second mark is dukkha, and this word gets mistranslated more than almost any word in the Pali language. It does not mean suffering the way English speakers use the word. The original Pali described the off-center hole in a wheel, not agony, not tragedy, just a little off, a little wrong. The kind of wrongness you feel on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing is actually broken, but everything feels slightly gray. The third mark is anattā, non-self. And here is what most people miss. These are not 3 separate teachings. They are one teaching seen from 3 angles. One teaching, 3 angles. If everything changes, then nothing can be permanently yours. If nothing is permanently yours, then clinging to it as self, as the thing that defines you, the thing you must protect, the thing you cannot afford to lose, that clinging hurts. It has to. You are gripping something that is already leaving. Non-self is not a metaphysical claim about whether you have a soul. It is an observation about why you suffer when you hold on. There is a monk named Khemaka. He appears in the Samyutta Nikaya, and his story is one of the most honest things in all of Buddhist literature. Khemaka is old. He is sick. He is bedridden. A group of younger monks comes to visit him, and they ask, "Elder, do you still see a self in the 5 aggregates?" No. He says, "I do not." Then are you an arahant? Have you reached full liberation? And Khemaka says, "No, I have not." The monks are confused. If you do not see a self in the aggregates, then what remains? What is left? And Khemaka gives one of the most beautiful answers in the entire Pali Canon. He says, "It is like a cloth that has been washed. The flower that scented it is gone. But the fragrance lingers. I no longer say I am form. I am feeling. I am consciousness. But there is still a subtle residual sense of I am, not attached to anything, not claiming anything, just a scent, a trace, and with continued practice, even that will fade. And you can test this yourself. Right now, think about the last time you were angry, really angry. You said, "I am angry," as if anger were your identity in that moment. But look more closely. What was actually happening? There was a tightness in your chest, a heat in your face, a story the mind was telling. He should not have said that. She had no right. This is not fair. There were sensations. There were thoughts. There were reactions firing in sequence, but where was the I that was angry? Where was the solid, fixed person behind all of it? You look for the one who is angry, the same way you look for the chariot. And you find parts, processes, patterns. But no driver, no owner, no one sitting in the center holding it all together. This is not theory. This is something you can observe in your own body, in your own mind, the next time an emotion rises. And when you do, when you catch the mind constructing a self out of passing weather, something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the grip loosens just a little, just enough to breathe. Here is the part nobody tells you. Understanding non-self is not a switch you flip. It is not an intellectual achievement, a moment where you read the right book and suddenly you get it and you are free. It is a process, a gradual releasing. Even advanced practitioners, monks who have spent decades in practice, describe a lingering scent of self. And the Buddha's teaching makes room for that. It does not demand perfection. It invites you to keep looking now. About 600 years after the Buddha, a philosopher in southern India takes this teaching and does something extraordinary with it. His name is Nāgārjuna. He is, by some accounts, the second most important thinker in the entire Buddhist tradition, after the Buddha himself. And what he does is this: he takes Anattā and extends it to everything. Not just you, not just your five aggregates. Everything. A cup, a mountain, a word, a nation, a moment in time. Nothing at all has inherent, independent, fixed existence. Everything exists only in relation to everything else. The cup exists in relation to the hand that holds it, the water it contains, the clay it was shaped from, the potter who made it, the earth that produced the clay. Pull any thread and the whole web shifts. Nāgārjuna called this Śūnyatā. Say it like Śūnyatā, emptiness. And that word has terrified people for 2,000 years because they hear emptiness and they hear nothingness. But that is not what it means. It means fullness, radical interdependence, the fact that nothing stands alone. Everything is connected to everything else. You are not a self because nothing is a self. You are not independent because nothing is independent. You are woven into the fabric of reality so completely that pulling you out of it would be like pulling wetness out of water. In 1890, about 1,700 years after Nāgārjuna, an American psychologist named William James sat at his desk at Harvard and wrote something remarkable. He described what he called the stream of consciousness. The self, James argued, is not a thing. It is a flow, a continuous sequence of mental events, thoughts, feelings, perceptions that the mind stitches together into a narrative after the fact. There is no thinker behind the thoughts. There are just thoughts arising, linking, dissolving, and the sense of a thinker is itself just another thought in the stream. James arrived at this through introspection and philosophical analysis. The Buddha arrived at it through meditation and direct observation. They lived 2,400 years apart, on opposite sides of the world, in entirely different intellectual traditions. And they pointed at the same thing, and this is not the only time it happened. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who split from Freud and built his own model of the psyche, arrived at a parallel insight from yet another direction. Jung argued that the ego, the part of you that says I, is not the totality of the mind. It is a small, lit room inside a much larger house. Most of what you are, your instincts, your patterns, Your deepest responses to the world operates below the floor of consciousness. The ego is useful. It gets you through the day, but it is not the master of the house. It is, in Jung's word, a complex, a cluster of habits and identifications that the mind has assembled and labeled me. Jung was not a Buddhist. He never used the word Anattā. But he would have recognized what the Buddha was pointing at, the constructed nature of the self you defend so fiercely. The self that feels so solid is, in Jung's framework and in the Buddha's, a working model, a sketch, a functional approximation that the mind generates because it needs one to operate. Useful, yes. Permanent, no. And the suffering comes when you confuse the sketch for the thing itself. Let us go back to the deer park. It is 528 BCE, or close to it. Isipatana, outside Varanasi. The five ascetics, Kondanya, Vapa, Bhatia, Mahanama, and Asaji are sitting on the ground. They had walked away from Gautama weeks earlier. For 6 years, they had starved alongside him, punished their bodies, believed that the path to liberation ran through suffering, and then Gautama ate a bowl of rice, offered by a village girl named Sujata. He sat in a river and bathed. He let his body recover, and they left. In their eyes, he had betrayed the path, but something brought them back. Some accounts say it was his presence, that when the Buddha walked into the deer park, there was something different about him that they could not ignore. Something still, something settled. Whatever it was, they sat down, and now he has just finished the second discourse, the Anattā Sutta. He has taken apart everything they thought they were: body, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, and asked them to find the self in any of it. And they could not. The text says that during this discourse, the minds of all 5 monks were liberated from the taints through not clinging. All 5. Not after years of further practice. Not after retreating to a cave. During the teaching itself. Now watch what happens next. Think about what that means. The teaching that sounds like it should terrify you. You have no self. There is no fixed you behind your experience. Is the teaching that set them free. Not a teaching about gaining something. Not a promise of heaven or reward. A teaching about letting go of something that was never real to begin with. And the relief of that, the sheer relief, was so total that 5 men who had spent 6 years torturing their bodies in search of liberation found it in 20 minutes of listening, because they did not lose themselves. They lost the prison of themselves. There is one more thing. The oldest disciple among the 5, Kondanya, is said to have understood the teaching first, and the Pali Canon records the Buddha's response when he saw understanding dawn on Kondanya's face. He said, "Kondanya knows. Kondanya knows." Just that. No grand declaration. No theological framework. A teacher watching a student finally see what he has been pointing at, and the word used in the Pali, anyasi, means not he believed or he accepted, but he knew directly. He saw it for himself. That is the standard. The Buddha never asked anyone to take his word for it. He said, "Look, see for yourself. And if you do not see it yet, keep looking." In 2001, a neuroscientist named Marcus Reichel at Washington University made a discovery that would have made the Buddha smile. Reichel and his team identified a network of brain regions that activate specifically when you are not focused on any external task. When you are lying in bed at 3 in the morning. When you are standing in the shower, when you are sitting in traffic. They called it the default mode network. And what does this network do when it fires up? It builds you. It replays your past. It rehearses your future. It generates the running monologue you call my thoughts. It constructs the autobiography, the story of who you are, what you have done, what you should be worried about. The DMN is, in a very real neuroscientific sense, the self-generator, the part of the brain whose job is to maintain the illusion of a continuous, stable me. Richard Davidson's contemplative neuroscience lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison has spent 2 decades studying what happens to this network in long-term meditators. The findings, published in peer-reviewed journals, are consistent. Experienced meditators show reduced default mode network activity. Not a silenced brain, not a blank mind, but a brain that has stopped compulsively constructing the self-narrative every single second. And there is more. Sarah Lazar's lab at Harvard found that experienced meditators had measurably thicker cortical regions associated with attention and sensory processing and thinner activity in the areas associated with self-referential thinking. The brain was not being damaged by meditation. It was being restructured. Less me, more here, now. The meditators were not losing their minds. They were losing the part of the mind that would not stop talking about itself. Think about what that means for you. The voice in your head at 3 in the morning, the one we started this video with, is not a fact about who you are. It is a pattern your brain runs, a neural habit, and like all habits, it can be seen, it can be understood. And with practice, patient, steady, unglamorous practice, it can loosen its grip. The Buddha did not have an fMRI machine. He had a mind, and the willingness to sit still and watch it. And what he saw 2,500 years before Reichla was exactly this. The mind generates a self the way the eye generates images, constantly, automatically, without being asked. And when you learn to see the process for what it is, a process, not a person, something loosens. Something that has been clenched your entire life begins to open, and this is where the misconception dies. The Buddha did not say, "You are nothing." He explicitly rejected nihilism. The Pali term is uccedaditti, the annihilationist view, and he called it a dangerous wrong turn. You exist. You experience. You think. You feel. You love. All of that is real, but you exist the way a river exists. Not as a thing, as a movement. You exist the way a flame exists, not as an object, but as a process that requires constant fuel. You exist the way a song exists, real, vivid, capable of making you weep, but try to grab it and hold it in your hand, and you will find there is nothing to hold. This is not the end of you. This is not the erasure of your experience. This is not a philosophy of nothingness. This is the most compassionate thing anyone has ever said to a human being. You are not trapped inside the person you think you are, and maybe that is why the Buddha chose this as his second teaching. Not his 10th, not his 100th, his second, right after the Four Noble Truths, as if to say, before we go any further, you need to know this. The self you are trying to save, it is not what you think it is. And the freedom you are looking for does not come from building a better self. It comes from seeing through the one you already have. He did not ask them to destroy anything. He asked them to look, and what they saw, what you can see, if you are willing to sit still long enough, is that the self is not a resident. It is a performance, a brilliant, convincing, lifelong performance that the mind puts on for an audience of one. And when you finally notice you are both the actor and the audience, something shifts. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. 3 things to carry with you. First, non-self does not mean you do not exist. It means there is no fixed, permanent, independent entity hiding behind your experience. You are not a thing. You are a process, like a river, like a flame, like a song, real, vivid, undeniable, but always moving. The 5 aggregates are not you. They are what is happening. And what is happening is always changing. Second, the next time you are caught in a thought spiral, the 3 a.m. loop, the inner critic, the anxiety that feels like it is you, try this. Instead of saying, I am anxious, say there is anxiety. Not a trick, not a game. A shift in perspective. You are not denying the anxiety. You are denying its claim on your identity. The Buddha's teaching in 6 words. You are not your weather. Storms come, storms go. You are not the storm. Third, and listen to this one carefully. If the self is not fixed, then the version of you that is suffering right now, the one who feels stuck, who feels broken, who feels like this is just who they are, and nothing will ever change, that version is not permanent. It is not the final word. You have been changing your entire life. You were not the same person at 5 and at 15 and at 30, and you will not be the same person next year. Non-self is not a loss. It is the most radical permission to change that anyone has ever been given. The door is not locked. It was never locked. You just thought it was. Because you thought the prison was you. When was the last time you were absolutely certain of who you were? And then you changed. I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. If this video helped you see something more clearly, subscribe. We put out a new video every week, taking the Dharma apart, looking at what it actually says, making it useful for your real life. Not a monastery, not a retreat center, right here, right where you are. The Buddha did not say you are nothing. He said you are not a thing, and there is a universe of freedom between those 2 sentences